Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. On today's Musical Innertube, we welcome back political commentator Dick Polman. Dick is Maury Povich Writer-in-Residence and Professor of Journalism at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's been since 2006. He's also a former national political writer and political columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Follow his work at dickpolman.net. Welcome back, Richard.
Nice to see you guys again.
Tell us, for a minute or two, what's on your mind in this election week? What are you thinking about a lot?
Well, besides trying to think about what palliatives I may need on election night,
yeah,
to get through it, and
I recommend scotch. That works for me.
Yeah, we're making homemade pizza.
So that's good. Yeah.
Some kind of comfort food. But aside from that, what I'm looking at is I'm trying to think ahead to election night and what might give us some kind of reasonable early interpretation of how this election is going. And I've noticed that actually two of the seven swing states, Georgia and North Carolina, are expected to report results early, in part because they actually have a lot of early voting that takes place now, and they can tabulate that all along, even before election night. So I have a feeling that Georgia and North Carolina are going to come in early, and I'm going to be looking at those to see if there's any trend lines that might tell us something big. For instance, North Carolina, which hasn't gone Democratic since 2008, Obama's first win, is actually very much in play by all indications. And if for some reason Harris looks like she's running very strongly there, stronger than anticipated, it might mean that she's going to do well in the election. And the same thing for Georgia, of course. And the indicators that we see so far is they've been actually tabulating along gender lines who has been voting early in those two states and a few others too. And it turns out that something like 55% of the turnout in the early voting has been female and 45% male. So if you take into account what every single poll is indicating is that there's a major gender gap and that women are strongly pro-Harris, particularly women of color, that might be something that the Harris campaign can feel good about. The other thing I want to look at on election night, and then I'll answer your question in a broader sense, is sometime around 5-6 o'clock. I think we're probably going to see some kind of exit poll results, which are at least some kind of a snapshot, interviewing people coming out of the voting booth. And those aren't necessarily completely reliable, I think. I mean, I remember 20 years ago when John Kerry was running against George W. Bush, who was the incumbent. The exit polls seemed to indicate that Kerry was going to win the election. And then it kind of just turned out that Democratic voters were just much happier to talk to exit pollsters than Republicans were. So they have to take them with a grain of salt in terms of at least the horse race aspect. But in terms of some of the demographic breakdown that you'll see there in terms of, black women, white women, men, black men, education levels, college educated voters tend to be much more for Harris in all the polls, and non-college are much more for Trump. So we might get some kind of numbers that give us some kind of sense of how this thing is going to shake out. Having said all that, what I'm thinking about more than anything else is that and I dearly, dearly hope I'm wrong about this, is that we're only at the beginning of the beginning. And, on election night, we just may not know enough about how this thing is going to go. And Pennsylvania, of course, which is, they're both candidates been camping out in Pennsylvania, is probably not going to get sorted out until they say late in the week or Saturday, which is what happened in 2020, because by law, the mail-in ballots can't get counted. They can't start getting counted until after the polls closed. So that's probably going to, really string out over time. So, and the last part of it is what I'm really, kind of dreading the most. And this is even if it looks like that Harris is, seems to be heading toward a decisive win, which I suppose is possible of all the scenarios, is that, we're going to get a ton of, 2020 redo here with Trump saying that, the votes are rigged and he's already doing it. He's been putting stuff on social media the last couple of days, basically saying that, Pennsylvania's cheating already. What's that phrase he likes? As a skill we've never seen before. So presumably the Democrats are going to be ready for it this time. They've had their own army of lawyers. But who knows? Maybe this is going to go on for weeks. I think regardless who wins this thing, I don't know if our bodies are built, for another 3-month overtime.
I have to say, Richard, the last time when we went to bed without a call, I don't think I have ever spent such a terrible night. I couldn't sleep. I've been watching so much political stuff on television and listening to so much of it on the news, and I couldn't sleep. So I went downstairs and I kept watching it. They kept saying, well, we won't know until tomorrow. So I wasn't learning anything, but it was so hard to sleep. I imagine a lot of people are going to have the same issue.
Yeah. You're talking about 2020.
Yes, I am. I am. Yeah.
Well, I have to say what I remember was in 2016 when, we kind of knew that Trump was going to win by 11 p.m. on election night, and 2020 where we didn't know. I had to force myself to go to bed at a reasonable hour because I had to get up in the morning and write something, A, and B, I had a political journalism class at Penn that met in the afternoon, and everybody was going to be writing stuff, and I had to read it all before. So I had to force myself to go to bed. But, beyond that, nobody could have foreseen what we had to deal with for the next 2 months. And what's really kind of, obviously disturbing about it, self-evident really, is that it's part of the Trump's brand, which is basically tear down our institutions and our democratic process and the voting process and the credibility of the process and the integrity of the process, are all part of the potential damage. And I feel really, really bad for these election poll workers who, are just giving up their time to try to do the right thing. And, I don't know, I hope none of them get manhandled the way that Rudy Giuliani did with those two women in Georgia who have successfully sued him now.
Yeah, now they own his apartment. Yay.
Yeah, that is correct.
Back in 2020, when all these lawsuits flew around and we had, even after the election was called and apparently done, well, heck, right up until January 6th, when we had the Electoral College being verified in the Capitol. As far as the lawsuits went, Trump was 0 for 43 or however many he filed.
0 for 60.
Was it 60? Okay.
Well, nationwide it was 0 for 60.
God's just trying to give him credit.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I lost count after 43, actually.
Right, exactly.
But the other thing, though, is that a lot of election officials say that they're ready. They've learned from 2020, and they've called for extra security at polling places and things like that.
Yeah.
Extra security for poll counters and that sort of thing. But we've also heard rumors that there are people in office in Republican-controlled states that have passed laws that make it more difficult. Like in Georgia, you had to, I guess this was thrown out, but they wanted you to hand count every ballot afterwards. So, this is all going to prolong it by how long do you think? Days, weeks, months?
Well, that actually depends. I'd say that depends on how close or not close the race is. I think one of the things that the Harris campaign has been trying to emphasize, or people certainly who support her, is that we need as decisive a victory as possible, and in order to, it might take the steam out of some of these efforts. Having, so if she wins, I don't know, a landslide, nobody wins a landslide the way we used to have landslides, where landslide used to be defined as 60%, right? So, Reagan in 84, Johnson in 64. Now I guess landslide would be, 53% or something like that, which hasn't happened really since George H.W. Bush in 1988. And that's the biggest one in the last, 26, whatever that is, 28 years, 26 years. Am I counting right? 36 years, excuse me. So we're looking for, if she can somehow get maybe 53% of the vote, and that's in the outer limits. I always, what I'm, sobered by, I suppose is the right word, is in 2020, Biden won by, he got 51% of the vote. I think, Trump got 47, something like that. And Biden won by 7 million votes. Right. In the popular vote and in the electoral college count, he won by the exact electoral college count that Trump won by 4 years earlier. Yes. And yet it didn't matter, and yet he still pushed all these things. But, and that's a hallmark of authoritarianism, that to think that, elections don't count unless you win.
The most recent batch of polls that I realize that polls are kind of shadow boxing, and with all those granteds put in there, the most recent polls I've seen show that Harris has established leads, not big leads, but established leads in Wisconsin and in Michigan.
Yeah,
but is more or less tied in Pennsy.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you'd like to meditate for a moment on what makes Pennsy different, what's going on in that state.
That's a good question. I'm a little bit flummoxed by that. I'm not so sure, John, that I really know the answer to that. I saw that. I think the poll you're referring to may have been the ABC News Ipsos poll, or yes, it might have been. I think it was. Yeah. I don't know why Pennsylvania is closer. Maybe it just has something to do with Elon Musk trumping around here, offering money to people, or maybe it just has to do with that the T is so culturally conservative and so receptive to what Trump is saying. I don't quite understand it myself. And I don't know whether to even, I don't know. The problem I have with the polls is that, we don't know if they are missing some kind of, undercurrent, that's out there that we're not going to know about, until the votes come in. I mean, I always think back to, 2022. When everybody and the press, especially, everybody was saying red wave. It's going to the midterm elections. Right. Everybody was saying red wave. They're going to get white. Republicans are going to win big in the House and Senate. Didn't happen. And in part, the reason it didn't happen was because it was the first election after Roe versus Wade was overturned. You had women coming out, all teed off. And one of the things that's possible here that the polls might be missing, and maybe this would be arguably true in Pennsylvania as well, is that the polls are missing a lot of, say, first-time voters, young, especially first-time voters, women, who are saying basically, this is enough of this. We gotta get rid of this guy. And we don't, our reproductive rights have been taken away, and we don't want it, we don't want to have them doubling down on it with the national abortion ban or J.D. Vance and the stuff that he keeps talking about. So it's possible that polls are missing those people. I mean, including perhaps women who are married to Trump supporting guys who are going to go into the booth and they're going to vote for Harris, and there's no one else there with them. Kind of a silent vote. Now, maybe this is pipe dream stuff. I don't know. The other thing that about Pennsylvania that may not be showing up in these polls, may not be. Pennsylvania has about more than 500,000 potential voters of Puerto Rican descent.
Yeah.
And the Madison Square Garden stuff has really just become, viral. And you've got all these Hispanic influencers, Puerto Rican Americans, Hispanic influencers who are, telling their 40 million followers, et cetera, that they're endorsing Harris now in part because of this. And there was one, actually, a major one who just switched his endorsement. I think it was yesterday from Trump to Harris. So that's what we don't know. The polls missed in 2022. When they were doing the red wave scenario, they missed these women. And maybe that's what's happening again. These are what Donald Rumsfeld would have called the unknown unknowns.
The things that we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let me preface this with a story. When I purchased my first smartphone after giving up my flip phone a number of years ago, I made sure I had one with a QWERTY keyboard. And the reason I did is because my children never call me, they text me. And as a matter of fact, that now extends to a lot of friends and other family. I get far more texts than I do phone calls. And this has been brought up a number of times when they talk about the way polls are conducted. Are they still conducted by phone? And if so, are we missing out on all those people who just don't use their phones anymore?
Yeah, especially young people.
Yeah.
Yes.
They text each other.
Yeah.
Or they use other methods of communication other than answering the phone. I know my phone is also set that any number that I don't have in my book automatically goes to voicemail. So I know other people have that as well.
Well, I think that pollsters have been saying, I can't quote anything off the top of my head right now, but I know I've read stuff saying where all these polls say that they've tried to correct for that by having a number of people that they talk to, or what they would consider to be a satisfying enough sample of cell phone respondents. That they are working that in however they get their numbers. But another thing that I'm just not, all right. So maybe they've corrected for that. I don't know. What I don't get a sense of that they've corrected for is, all right, when they say likely voters, this is always what we say. We don't want to just see polls that say registered voters. We want to look at polls that say, here's what likely voters are going to do. But what is the definition of a likely voter?
Right.
I think part of, from everything I've read, part of the definition is that people who have a voting history. They voted, if they remember, sometimes people don't even remember if they voted or who they voted for. It's just not important to them, but if they voted the last 3 elections or whatever, well, now they're a likely voter. But what happens when you're talking about a first time voter? Do they get sampled in likely voters? I asked that question without really knowing the answer to that, but I think, as someone who watches this stuff closely, too closely for my own sanity, I have never really seen that question answered to my satisfaction.
Since we're talking about voting, and since the three of us belong to the gender that's responsible for 87% of all the violent crime and theft in the world, evidently, in other words, we are men, and men are bad and ugly and horrible and also smell funny. Men are also a problem in this election.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are a big one. There are a lot of reasons. For example, I'll just ask you this question. Is there going to be a Bradley effect in this vote? There certainly was one, I think, in 2016. And what I mean by that is Tom Bradley was the black mayor of Los Angeles, and he thought he was going to win big in a state election, and all the polls said he was going to win really big. And everybody snuck off to the voting booth and voted for the white guy. And it happened twice in a row, and it's become the Bradley effect. I'm just wondering if we get a national Bradley effect here.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to, how this is going to be measured or how it can be measured is very hard, but I think there's the racism and misogyny factors here. And particularly now, and Harris is kind of a twofer in that category.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to, I think it's hard to poll on that because, what people are going to want to get on the phone and admit that, I guess some don't mind. I guess some will admit it. I think some of them were on stage at the Madison Square Garden event. But, the average person going to tell a pollster, no, I'm not going to vote. I think she's qualified, but I'm not going to vote for her because she's black. But I think that's a factor that we have to pay attention to. And it's not just, I was thinking today about the misogyny factor. And there have been interviews. I mean, some of it's anecdotal interviews or whatever with African American men that don't like the fact that she's a woman. Maybe they feel in some ways that it's partly, emasculating or something. And that I say that because you mentioned, John, you brought up the issue of men in general. And I think part of what's going on with men, when you look at this, the solid support that Trump has among men generally, particularly white men, non-college educated, particularly non-college educated white men who are below the middle class. I think they feel, I don't know, rightly, wrongly, fairly or not, they feel that the country's changing and in ways that in the 21st century that's leaving them behind. The whole idea perhaps of a patriarchal, we were once a patriarchal society. It's much less so now. And I think there's a lot of guys, and you can see it in the interviews, a lot of guys feel threatened by all the changes, and Kamala looks like she might embody those changes, epitomize. And I think that's one of the reasons that Trump's been doing all these podcasts with these podcasters who have huge male audiences like Joe Rogan. The reason he put in 3 hours with him the other day, the reason he was driving around yesterday in that sanitation truck, it's going in circles. If there's a metaphor there, block that metaphor. But it's to show this kind of like guy strength, a certain kind of guy strength. And he's good at the visuals of it. It's just part of his mad genius. So that's, we're going to have, I think, probably when this all shakes out, potentially the biggest gender gap of any election, and we've had them now for quite a while.
We'll return to our podcast in just a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Dick Polman is Maury Povich Writer-in-Residence and Professor of Journalism at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's been since 2006.
From 1992 to 2006, he was national political writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, covering presidential elections from 1992 to 2008.
He was also political columnist at the Inquirer, and from 2012 to 2019, he was a columnist on WHYY-FM.
Follow his work at dickpolman.net. That's DICKPOLMAN.net. And check out his University of Pennsylvania webpage at english.upenn, that's upenn.edu/people/Dick-Polman.
And now we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress. We always talk about undecided voters, and I think we've mentioned it in previous podcasts with you, Dick, where undecided voters are usually people that aren't paying attention until they have to, until they're forced to go into the voting booth. And people who aren't paying attention, who may be picking up now on the advertising, on the relentless advertising that is going on right now, are seeing all of these super PACs, the ones that were unleashed with the Supreme Court decision. Harris has unleashed thousands of killer immigrants on us. The streets are not safe. That whole thing, that whole level of danger. So on top of the misogyny, you have this level of danger, which of course Trump just jumps on top of.
Well, yeah. And there's a very receptive audience for that. That's for the audience that feels that, the country's changing in ways that they can't abide or fathom. The whole notion when he says, in the debate, for example, when he says, the Haitians are eating the cats and they're eating the dogs, it's entirely possible and maybe even likely that a lot of the people who were receptive to that kind of messaging don't necessarily even care whether he's telling the truth on that, in terms of fact checking it. It's more a question of, that he is, it's just something, it's a representation of the threat, that they feel. And he's, so it's, the factual aspect of it doesn't matter. And here's another thing that Don was just talking about, some of these ads, about the immigrants and how she's unleashing all these migrants who are committing crime, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what's kind of, in a 30-second ad, as we've known for many years, it's not exactly a haven for nuance or factual, you can't factually rebut it, because it's just so visceral and it's emotional. And, the fact of the matter is, and there have been so many studies on this, and as soon as I say the word studies, it's like, here's what the elitists say.
Right.
But their studies have been showing for a long time that crime in this country, the crime rate among American-born Americans of all races, including whites, is higher than the crime rate among undocumented immigrants. And it's just, yes, there have been some, horrible, tragic murders. And, just like, he's mentioned a few times, and he did that at the Madison Square Garden thing. But you could easily put up, any number of horrific crimes, that people born here, native here, been here for generations, commit, and their crime rate is higher. But, it's like, Harris, to her credit, although it'd be ideally be great if she could do this, but she can't. Well, she doesn't want to get tied up in that. She doesn't want to take the bait and say, yes, but, she doesn't want to be explaining, yes, but the studies show this and the studies show that.
Yes,
you can't, then you're on defense. And I give her campaign credit for basically saying, we're going to have our message. We're going to say, what we want to say thematically. And, he's going to say what he says thematically. And hopefully it'll shake out that, her message will trump the fear. I'm using the word Trump there, inadvertently as a pun.
Very clever, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, as a verb. I know that, even the mainstream press, which, is just so much in love with Trump because he'll say outrageous things and, television loves a spectacle. But by the same token, when they made their big final pushes over the weekend, when Trump was at Madison Square Garden, spewing hate, and, Harris was on the ellipse, near the Capitol, talking about uniting people and all that. That seemed to be a message that the mainstream media was in love with. They loved to do that. Almost a split screen with those two and talk about how the messages were that much different. So I don't know if that landed with anybody, but that was...
And so given that, I agree with that. And given that, you can just imagine how incandescently angry the Harris campaign, and Harris herself probably, must have been when Joe Biden stepped in it and stepped on their message. By saying the thing, garbling his sentence. He was talking either about the guy who was on stage was garbage, or that his message was garbage, the comedian, I should say. But it came out sounding like he was maybe saying that all Trump supporters were garbage because he can't, I can see why they kept him off the campaign trail because it was insane.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the press, and yes, I think she got mostly a good split screen out of that, but having in the last 24 hours, once Biden said that thing about garbage, then it was all of a sudden all over the news cycle, and the Times was running stories all about it, and CNN wouldn't let it go. And, I found that kind of frustrating because, for months and months and months, Trump has been talking about anybody that doesn't vote for him as vermin and, as the enemy within. And he said the whole country is a garbage can. And he said that the people supporting Harris are garbage, quote unquote, from September 7th. And so it's like, let's have some proportionality here, folks.
Absolutely.
But, I understand how our mainstream media friends, and, we've all been part of it in one way or another, they want to be able to say they're holding both, candidates accountable. but things are asymmetric in a way that they've never been in our lifetimes. So I hope this little Biden flap, will probably, maybe it's died out by this afternoon, because it's just, it's been getting in the way of Harris's closing message.
I should have thought that the media saw in Biden's words, whatever they were, and I've listened to them 5 times, and I'm going to be agnostic about what he was trying to say because I have no idea, but they saw in it kind of an echo of the Deplorables episode with Hillary Clinton,
Yes.
which is often referred to when trying to account for her loss. And they saw it as something like the same thing, although it isn't like the same thing. It isn't actually, it's very different. But they saw it like that, and they just went to town with it as they saw a story in it. I mean, it's sort of inevitable.
Yeah, well, certainly the Republicans wanted it. They wanted to change the conversation. They wanted to get the conversation away from what happened on that stage in Madison Square Garden. And it was like, oh my God, then now we've got something to ride with. But here's one of the biggest differences of all. And, write it on the blackboard 50 times. It's like Joe Biden is not the candidate. Joe Biden is lame duck. He's going to be leaving the White House. He's not the candidate. Hillary Clinton, she was the candidate, and maybe she took heat for that she should or shouldn't have. But Biden's not the candidate. And the fact that he said what he said and garbled it the way he said it was precisely the reason why why Democrats took away the car keys in the first place.
Yeah. Do you think the effort in recent weeks, maybe the last 3 or 4 weeks, to tie Harris to the Biden administration and to say that her administration will just be a continuation of those policies, does that hold any water at all?
Well, one of the tricky things she's got here had to deal with all along is that he's, she's from the incumbent party, and so, incumbents are typically having to defend what they do. And it's it's very sensitive for her, obviously, because, she's only been able to separate in some ways so much from him. And I guess what's also what's been very difficult for her is that, she hasn't wanted to get sucked into a conversation about what have actually been a very, very strong record of achievement in any number of things that Biden was able to pass with a closely divided Congress. I don't know, the biggest investment in climate change ever, all kinds of stuff involving semiconductor, factories getting built here, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, there was just the Infrastructure Act and the roads and bridges that have been built with an unprecedented amount of money that people have been talking about for years needed to happen. And so it's happening everywhere. And conservatives drive on those roads and bridges too. But it's like she hasn't been, I think it's been hard for her to walk that line, frankly. I think that's been one of the hardest things. So she said this thing on, where was it? The View, where she said, well, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that, where she differs with him. And she's come up with better answers for that, lately. One of the things that she's been able to do, I don't know, she hasn't talked about it much lately, once she unveiled it a few weeks ago, is that she wants to expand Medicare so that it'll cover, at-home services for seniors living at home who really need nursing care and all this kind of stuff, which, private insurance is very spotty about. And that's a big, expanding Medicare to help people at home. Now, Joe Biden hasn't pushed that out, but she is. And, that's something that she could actually, I suppose, be talking about, more in the closing days. But yeah, so it's been a real balancing act. Here's the economy, which is in many ways, I just saw Wall Street Journal today had a story saying that, referring to the remarkable economy, referring to the American economy right now, the remarkable economy. This is Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal. The Economist just a few weeks ago said that the American economy is the strongest in the Western world. And I suppose she could get a thing and saying, Joe Biden has brought us back from the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. But by the same token, she's had to say, and we've heard her say it, she's had to say, yes, but we have a lot more work to do. A lot of people are still feeling the pinch in certain ways. The inflation's gone back down, but that's still where people's heads are at. So the whole incumbency factor that Don just brought up, that's been very hard for her to navigate. And she's had to do it, in like overnight, virtually speaking, the shortest presidential campaign that anybody can remember. Well, it is actually.
It brings us back to looking at this campaign and to see one side that seems to be doing everything wrong. And by the way, not to be outdone, we have Trump being quoted as saying, I'm going to protect women whether they want it or not, which was really a smart thing to say. I mean, really, for anybody else, a horrible mistake, and have been plenty. And then you have this delicately tightrope walking campaign by Harris, which has been free of horrible sort of atomic bomb lapses. In fact, it's been a pretty good campaign. But I think the other thing that contributes to the asymmetricality that you were mentioning, Richard, is that she's running against a celebrity politician. And the people who follow him grade him on how well he's doing what he does. People really like his irreverence. They like his norm busting. They like the fact that he does not respect the system. And they liked it when he was the host of the TV shows that he's been hosted of. He sort of that whole campaign runs by different rules. So when he makes political errors, it doesn't seem to count.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a double standard, and there's a double standard applied to these candidates. Double standard in a lot of the coverage as well. Somebody said on, so I wish I had thought of this, but I can't remember who said it on CNN. That he gets to be lawless and she has to be flawless.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
It might have been Van Jones actually. But that goes to what you were just saying, so, for him, he can say, oh, I'm going to send the military after my enemies. And, I'm going to have this mass deportation, with no price tag involved, and nobody asks what the hell the price tag is and all that. But she is like, well, you had a different position on something 5 years ago than you seem to have now. And teasing that out. And it just comes back to this, notion that, I'm sure a lot of women are pretty upset about, which is that, here we have again, as a lot of women I suspect see in the workplace, you've got a highly qualified woman, and she has to be that much better than a totally unqualified man. And like you were just saying, John, you know, the fact that he's got this celebrity status, really has a lot to do with it. Because, it's like all his flaws are kind of just like baked in the cake.
Yeah.
In some ways, you know, I was giving a talk earlier today, actually, and we got into this whole thing about the ground game and the canvassing, and everybody's been saying, and apparently it's true, that Harris has a much stronger ground game, going door to door, much more meticulous, much more, you know, detailed than he does, and that he's outsourced a lot of it to some kind of Elon Musk associated PAC or something. But by the same token, does he even need a ground game? Everybody knows him. Everybody's got there's a 1,000% identity. You know, that everybody knows everything about him at this point. There's nothing new that you have to persuade anybody about if you're going door to door. And that all goes back to what John said this too. It goes back to that TV show he had. And I was saying to these people earlier today, that one of the things that the media missed a lot of in 2016, I include myself in this, is that he had a built-in audience from his TV show, from his, you know, his fake quiz show, whatever that was.
The Apprentice.
That NBC built up for him. And he had a built-in audience. So to them, he was already a well-known TV character. They knew all his, you know, his quirks and his way he talked, and oh wow. And now he's going to take on politics. And so, so this is one of the things that he's understood with his mad genius, is the entertainment factor, the bread and circuses factor. But that's how some societies wind up with authoritarianism, is these bread and circus distractions.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like Andy Griffith from that old movie. What was it? Face in the Crowd or
A Face in the Crowd, which I just saw recently. Yeah, and it was very resonant.
Where Andy Griffith was a grassroots politician that took everybody by storm, even though he didn't mean a damn thing he said. And, you know, I'm sure books can be written about Trump's appeal and why it is, even though rational people, I've had several Republicans tell me in the last 2 weeks, I hate Trump, but I'm voting for him anyway.
And what reasons were they giving?
Oh, just, you know, I mean, they got into stuff about the economy. One person started telling me all sorts of bull crap about how when Harris was, I don't know if this allegation was when she was vice president or district attorney or attorney general, but when she walked into the room, everybody had to lower their eyes and say, yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, couldn't directly address her. You know, I mean, who knows that? Who is in the room when she does that? I don't know. I've never heard that one. That's the kind of stuff that makes it to Facebook.
Yes.
And becomes real because it's on Twitter or Facebook or whatever.
There's all these Facebook groups that are, you know, they're all under the radar, you know, and that's actually the fracturing of the media is another factor in all this. And and another factor in why this is perhaps so close also is, you know, everybody's got their information silos now. It's not like in the old days where you had, you know, mainstream gatekeepers that everybody kind of abided by, even the people who, even Republicans and Democrats alike, you know, so now everybody has their own sources of information. Some, let's just say, far better than others. And they abide by them. And, you know, other things just can't break through.
Yeah.
Well, Dick Polman, thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll pick this up after the election and see how you survived and how drunk you got. How many drugs you were forced to take, you know, which sanitarium they put you into and everything. It's one of the big things we're looking forward to in the post-election season. So,
okay, well, that's a deal. That's a deal.
So thank you for being with us on the Musical Innertube. I think we've had one of the most invigorating discussions of what's coming up that you can find. So thank you for that.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Dick. And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.